Welcome. This is the Boundaries Workshop. We're going to be learning boundaries. I'm reading a book. It is Boundaries. I will be linking the information down below. Those of you who have missed the workshop, feel free to listen in. Okay, so in our first chapter that we read together, we read about what it looked like to be living in a boundaryless life. Do you guys remember what we read in there and how that person's life sort of unfolded before us?
Yes.
Okay. Timo Uwu. Okay. In Boundaries Chapter 1 and 2, we went over the actual boundary types because it's one thing to say, they have a boundaryless life, but what does a boundary even look like? And so that's something that we went over in the second chapter. And the examples of boundaries were skin, which is the basic boundary that defines us. And people use this boundary as a quote unquote get under my skin type of phrase. And our physical self is the first way that we learn that we are separate from others, right? The other one was words. In the physical world, a fence or some other kind of structure is a boundary. But in the spiritual world, these fences are invisible. But we create fences, protective fences, with our words. If you guys can't hear me for any reason, I'm actually using another mic. So just let me know and I will change my position. The third boundary was truth. Knowing the truth about limits and boundaries around us, realizing unchangeable realities. Again, this is all posted in the thread from the stream chat if you guys want to review it. Another boundary is time. Taking time off from a person or a project is a way of regaining ownership over some out of control aspect of our lives. Emotional distance was another one which we talked about. Other people can also be used as a boundary by letting people in, right? Letting people support us instead of assuming that nobody cares and nobody wants to help us and we're all by ourselves in this world, which as children of abuse, we do assume this because we've been shown this, we've been told this in some way or another by our parents. But a boundary is to be able to accept that support and involving a support network, which I'm trying to build here. So with that, we'll continue with the next group of boundaries. Okay, we're going to probably do about 7 or 8 pages, if that's okay with you guys. So, consequences. One of my favorite things that I spoke to you guys about in last meeting. The book says about this. Trespassing on other people's property carries consequences. No trespassing signs usually carry a threat of prosecution if someone steps over the boundary. The Bible teaches this principle over and over, saying, if we walk one way, this will happen. If we walk another way, something else will happen. Just as the Bible sets consequences for certain behaviors, we too need to back up our boundaries with consequences. How many marriages could have been saved if one spouse followed through with the threat of, if you don't stop drinking, or coming home at midnight, or hitting me, or yelling at the kids, I will leave until you get some treatment. Or how many young adults' lives would have been turned around if parents followed through with their threats of no more money if you quit another job without having further employment, or no bed if you continue to smoke marijuana in my house, etc. Paul is not kidding in 2 Thessalonians when he says, if anyone will not work, don't let him or her eat. God does not enable irresponsible behavior. Hunger is a consequence of laziness. Consequences give some good barbs to fences. They let people know the seriousness of a trespass and the seriousness of our respect for ourselves. This teaches that our commitment to living according to helpful values is something we hold dear and will fight to protect and guard. In the last meeting, we were talking about writing down what are some boundaries that you yourself have seen other people break from you, as well as what are some boundaries that you believe you could use with certain people in your lives. Maybe your parents, maybe a boss, maybe an ex, maybe a coworker, right? Or friends even. All of these types of relationships can be with boundaryless people. And since we have started out without boundaries, many of those relationships will mirror our lack of boundaries, if that makes sense. So then, what is within our boundaries, right? The story of the Good Samaritan is a model of correct behavior in many dimensions. It is a good illustration of boundaries when they should both be observed and violated. Imagine for a moment how the story might read if the Samaritan were a boundaryless person. You know the story. A man traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho was mugged. The robbers stripped him and beat him and left him half dead. A priest and a Levite passed by on the other side of the road, ignoring the hurt man. But a good Samaritan took pity on him, bandaged his wounds, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day the Samaritan gave the innkeeper money and said, "Look after him. When I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have." Let's depart for a moment from that familiar story here. Suppose the injured man wakes up at this point in the story and says, "What? You're leaving?" "Yes, I am. I have some business in Jericho I have to attend to," the Samaritan replies. "Don't you think you're being selfish? I'm in pretty bad shape here. I'm going to need someone to talk to. How is Jesus going to use you as an example? You're not even acting like a Christian, abandoning me like this in my time of need. What happened to deny yourself?" "Why, I guess you're right," the Samaritan says. "That would be uncaring of me to leave you here alone. I should do more. I'll postpone my trip instead for a few days." So, in this story, the Samaritan then stays with the man for 3 days, talking to him, making sure he's happy and content. On the afternoon of the third day, there's a knock at the door and a messenger comes in. He hands the Samaritan a message from his business contacts in Jericho. "Waited as long as we could. Sorry. Have decided to sell the camels to another party. Our next herd will be here in 6 months. "How could you do this to me?" the Samaritan screams at the recovering man, waving the message in the air. "Look what you've done now. You've caused me to lose the camels I needed for my business. Now I can't deliver my goods. This may put me out of business. How could you do this to me?" At some level, this story may be familiar to us. We may be moved with compassion to give to someone in need. But then this person manipulates us into giving more than we want to give. We end up instead resentful and angry, having missed something we needed in our own life. Or we may want more from someone else, and we pressure them until they give in. They give not out of their heart or free will, but out of compliance. And they resent us for what they give. Neither one of us comes out ahead. Can you guys see the difference between the stories where the Good Samaritan ends up respecting their own boundaries and leaves versus staying there and becoming resentful that they stayed to help the man? That's often us in our lives. We have people in our lives who push us to do things in one way or another that makes us feel obligated to them rather than wanting to give out of the kindness of our own hearts. I know that each and every one of you have experienced that type of situation because it is a common situation, especially growing up in families with abuse or where there's alcohol and addiction present, right? We get this sense of obligation, and suddenly everything is kind of on our shoulders. We need to meet these obligations of other people to the point where we put ourselves and our own needs aside. And that belief in and of itself is false. So how much more freedom could we experience if we learn to say, no, I need to take care of my needs first, and then I will be able to help you. Or I'll be able to help you up until this point, but then I need to do, XYZ, right? In the other way, you become resentful, helping, quote unquote, helping the other person, because it's not out of a sense of giving or even of goodwill. It's out of a sense of obligation. It's out of a sense of feeling like I have to do this, or even control, right? For those of us who are codependent, that's a great control tactic. I'll help you. That's a way to control what the other person is doing, because they're right there. They're in our power. They're in our view. They're in our hands, so to speak. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Feelings is another one. Feelings have gotten a bad rap in the Christian world. They have been called everything from unimportant to fleshly. At the same time, though, example after example shows how our feelings play an enormous role in our motivation and in our behavior towards others. How many times have you seen people do ungodly things to one another because of hurt feelings? Or how many times has someone had to be hospitalized for depression after years and years of trying to ignore the way they felt until they became suicidal? Feelings should neither be ignored nor placed in charge of us. The Bible shows us instead to own our feelings and be aware of them. They can be used to motivate us to do much good. The Good Samaritan's pity moved him to go to the injured Israelite. The father was filled with compassion for his lost son when he saw him and threw his arms around him. Many times Jesus had compassion for the people to whom he ministered. Feelings come from your heart and can tell you the state of your relationships. They can tell you if things are going well or if there's a problem. If you feel close and loving, things are probably going well. If you feel angry, you have a problem that needs to be addressed. But the point is, your feelings are your responsibility, and you must own them and see them as your problem so that you can begin to find an answer to whatever issue it is that they are pointing to. And as an aside to this, oftentimes as codependents, we will take on the emotions of other people and the feeling responsibilities of other people and make them our own. This does not serve the person, and it does not serve us either. We engage in this behavior trying to be maybe caring, maybe show compassion, but the way that codependents do it is that there is an underlying sense of entitlement. Well, if I'm there for you, then you need to be there for me. If I'm helping you, then you need to be helping me. Why are you not helping me? I do all these things for people, but they don't do anything for me back. I feel like I'm always giving and I'm always doing the work, so to speak, and they're never doing the work. They're only taking, right? But what we don't recognize, especially with feelings and having our feelings be hurt, is that sometimes our own actions literally leads us into feeling that way. And the reason that we do feel that way is because we're doing something without putting our actual needs or demands first. Yokono gave an amazing testament to this last week when he was mentioning, well, I don't want to burden people, right? He feels that in asking for what he needs, it's a burden for people. It's going to be a burden if he says he needs XYZ. And then what happens if it's a burden for people? We think, well, we're going to lose those people, or they're not going to want to be around us, right? And of course, we want to be liked and we want to be appreciated by people. That's a human need. But that human need shouldn't lead us to do things and take on the consequences of other people, as well as take on the feelings associated to other people onto ourselves. There needs to be that boundary there so that there can be a separation, if that makes sense. If we take responsibility for our own feelings, that means that we also take responsibility for the things that led to those feelings. For instance, let's say my mom is constantly trying to get me to do something, right? She's pushing me and she, uses guilt tactics and saying I don't help her and how she's overwhelmed with blah, blah, blah. Or maybe she's yelling at me and calling me useless and lazy, right? All of these, though different, they are all control tactics and manipulation tactics to get me to feel a certain way so that I will do whatever it is, right? By doing that, if I continue to allow her, if I recognize that's what it is, and I continue to allow her to do that with no consequences and not confronting her, she's never going to learn, one, that it's not okay for her to do that. Two, I could be there like, oh God, I wish she would change, but how's she supposed to change if I haven't even told her that she's doing this thing, right? I'm expecting her to read my mind. I'm expecting her to feel what I feel. Well, if so-and-so did this, wouldn't you feel this way? No, not necessarily. People do not necessarily feel what we feel in any given situation. A lot of times we tend to think, well, if I'm feeling this way, if I did this to that person, then they would feel that way too. But that's not the case. And in fact, if we go a step outside of that, if we actually ask them, we'll find out what the true case is. And oftentimes they'll tell us, no, I wouldn't feel that way if the situation were reversed. And so that's why they're doing the things that they're doing or having the expectation that they're having on us, is because they would not feel the same way that we're feeling. So then if we take responsibility for our feelings, we own our feelings and our behaviors that led to there, or what we accept, oftentimes we'll find that when we feel resentment towards people, or when we feel depressed, a lot of that comes from us not having boundaries with other people. And so it gets to a point where we become overwhelmed. Does that make sense? Attitudes and beliefs is another boundary. Attitudes have to do with your orientation towards something, the stance that you take toward others, toward God, toward life, toward work, and towards your relationships. Beliefs are anything that you accept as true. Oftentimes, you guys will hear me in advice stream talk about core beliefs. Core beliefs is a concept that came from psychology, but this book also uses the term core beliefs in a similar way, which we'll go into in chapters 3 and 4, how these core beliefs are actually formed. Often we do not see an attitude or belief as the source of discomfort in our life. We instead blame other people, as did our first parents, Adam and Eve. We need to own our own attitudes and convictions because they fall within our property line. We are the ones who feel their effect and the only ones who can change them. The tough thing about attitudes is that we learn them very early in life. They play a big part in the map of who we are and how we operate. Jay says, that's something I have issue with too, is what are my core beliefs and what are my core values, which is why I'm bad at placing boundaries and keeping boundaries. Yes. And one of the things I would recommend for that, Mr. J, is actually looking at and thinking about what your core beliefs are. That takes some time. Coming up with, all of them isn't going to be overnight. But some of them you can determine already because those core beliefs were given to you from childhood. So there's certain things that you believe, and one of them that you can write down on your list, which we talked about the other day, if you don't mind me sharing here in our workshop, is that when you are a child of abuse, right, that skin boundary is violated, you then believe, and this is a core belief, that whatever happens physically to you is your fault. Somehow, your fault. It doesn't matter where, at work, at school, in your relationship. This core belief will go with you throughout your entire life. And if you have people in your life who engage in blame, those people will make you believe that it's your fault. You will find yourself surrounded by people who you often hear the same thing from. Well, I did this because you. I feel this way because you. That is a blame statement, right? And you accept that because as a child of abuse, your skin boundary, your truth boundary, and your words boundary was violated. And so when you go to school at that age, if somebody randomly hit you in the face, you would probably wonder, what did I do, right? You wouldn't think twice to realize this person is not supposed to hit me. What are they doing? And the reason is that it's opposite for you is because you have experienced that abuse. So now in your love relationships, in your, romantic relationships, one of your core beliefs, if somebody, let's say, slaps you, right? Yes, you may think, oh, it was wrong for them to do that because that's your enlightened self. But your core belief is, what did I do to deserve this? Why did this happen to me? It's probably because XYZ, right? Insert whatever it is that your mom said there. And that is what you will core believe of why you got slapped. Does that make sense? That is an example of a core belief. And we have a lot of those. Your core belief about what it means to be a man, you can write that down on the list. What is my core belief? What does a real man look like in my core belief? What do I really believe? Okay. And so you want to write those down because you're going to be working with those core beliefs. And later, whether it's with your therapist or with me in workshop or whatever, you're going to be questioning those core beliefs with your adult mind, not your child mind that has those core beliefs. If that makes sense.
So you want us to list down what we think are our core beliefs of what being a man is really like?
And women too, but since it's mostly men in here, yeah. Both. No, he's not laughing at you. So listing these will help you to recognize, what it is that you believe. And when you understand and see on paper or on your phone or wherever you want to put it, when you see that on paper, you can then question the next question, which any psychologist will ask you, where did I get this belief from, right? Because that core belief that you have comes from somewhere. It's not like something that just you were born with. You think it is because you've had it since you were young. Does that make sense?
So, do you want us to list what we thought a man should be like as
Yes.
a kid when we were a kid, or what we learned now?
It hasn't changed. You'll see that the kid picture is the same as your adult picture.
Well, for me, see, the thing is, you know, I've grown up with, you know, role models that they weren't really the best, you know.
Yeah, I know.
Male role models. But I don't know. I don't know if anyone else in here is.
But they taught you those things. You learned things from them.
I've learned. Yeah, of course, I've learned certain things from them, but I didn't like those things. You know, I've seen many things about my family, and I've learned through my own family, right? I've made mistakes myself, but I've learned certain things from my family. Like my mom, when she would cheat and when she would get cheated on, that is something I don't like. That's something I don't partake in. Cheating is a big no in my
Okay, but let's take that a step further.
Right.
But do you think that it's possible that women cheat?
Yeah, of course.
Do you think that 75% of women cheat?
Of course, just like there's a high percentage of men that cheat.
That's a core belief. Because the reason is, that's not true. 75% of women do not cheat. But because your mom, and this is what I mean about the early life forming these beliefs, because your mom showed you that, that became your core belief. You get what I'm saying?
I guess. I don't know, in this day and age. I don't know when this. I don't know the real statistics on cheating versus men versus women. I think it's equal on both. Huh?
It's not 75% of people.
I don't know. Like I said, my day and age, like I grew up in the age of sex and the age of cheating, and there was a lot of cheating on both ends.
You grew up, meaning that was your experience.
Yeah, but
that's what a core belief
with
is.
Other people as well. That's why I say, like,
I know, those other people serve to reinforce what you already believe, aka your core belief. So writing that down will empower you to understand where that core belief actually comes from, and then be able to, with your adult mind, do the actual research to question and find out the truth that you could not find out when you were a child. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense. I just still have, you know, a belief that it's still a lot higher. It's way higher than 75%, in my opinion, because, you know,
because your mom cheated.
Literally, it wasn't even with my mom, just her. It wasn't just with her.
I know,
friends,
but
it was with people that I knew. Like,
okay, let me flip this for you. Let's say your mom never cheated.
Yeah.
You came from a household that there was no cheating involved.
Yeah.
I can assure you, you would not think that 75% of people in the world are cheaters. And the reason is because you have never experienced that as a child. Do you see the difference between your core belief and, let's say, somebody else's out there who's coming from a family that cheating is not even in their mind? Cheating doesn't happen.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. So writing that down for yourself, and I do urge you to do this and take some time to do this. Writing that down for yourself and finding out what those core beliefs are, and then questioning where they came from. Was it mom, dad, uncle, a family member? And write that down.
Well,
if you need to, I'll give you a format for that.
Okay. Well, I just want to let you know that my beliefs on cheating have changed. I'm talking about as a child, what I've experienced. I know that
I know.
because of the things that I've learned, I know what to look out for in certain people, and you know, normally there are a lot of red flags when it comes to cheating. How as soon as someone does even the littlest thing to even betray your trust is a red flag, and you don't know. I guess it makes it hard because once you don't have trust for someone, it's hard because there are people who are really good people out there, and they won't, maybe they do something stupid, and you know you don't trust them anymore, and that's it. They're good people, but there are people out there who are just not trustworthy and can really hurt you and make it much worse. And you taught me that.
Yes.
You taught me to watch out for those red flags. And I've been doing that, and I noticed that I can catch it ahead of time before I get hurt, or anyone else gets hurt. I can catch it ahead of
And I
time, those
want
red
that for
flags.
you. I want that
Yeah.
for you. But I want you also to be able to take it a step further, which it comes after catching the red flags, and recognize your own responsibility in
Is
that
setting the boundary.
attraction. Yeah.
Mhm.
I see what you're saying
100%, I
there,
get
Jay.
it.
Yeah. And so there's kind of it may seem like, oh, V taught me this thing and now she wants to teach me something else, but the reason is because there's steps to this, right? I mean, Mr. J can even confirm this because he has actually a life coach right now, and his life coach is taking the same steps that I'm taking with you guys, it just piece by piece by piece. There is an end, but Mr. J is not ready for the end, so he's starting with the first step. And for you, Psycho Kensho, one of these core beliefs and starting to recognize your own core beliefs would be one, like step one of 237 steps or whatever. That's just a random number there. But I say that to say this. There's going to be steps on this journey of learning boundaries. For instance, we're on chapter 2, right? Chapter 3 is going to be very different and have very different exercises than chapter 2 did. So I understand where you're coming from, that yes, that's in your experience, etc. But what I'm asking you is step outside also of your experience to see that the reason you believe what you believe is because of your own experience.
Yeah.
Not everyone has experienced what you have experienced. And so they don't have the same belief system as you, and so they don't operate the same way as you.
It's kind of hard for me to sometimes think outside of it. Like
I know.
that's mainly what I do. Is I think outside. I think of the other side. I think of how. So that's normally how I think. But sometimes I guess certain experiences in my life prevent me from thinking that way.
Yes.
And that's why it's with certain things I have like a very adamant position on.
Yes.
And you know, like you were talking about, like you can come from a family, a household where no one cheats. But then again, like I always like I could think like that, but
you can't think like that because you only know your experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. I just want you to recognize that it is your experience, which means it's not everyone's.
Yeah. I know that. It's just like, yeah, I get it.
Yeah. And so by recognizing, our own experience, like for instance, I could say all men are cheaters and all men will eventually beat the shit out of their partner, right? Because that's my experience. But that core belief, sure as fuck, isn't going to lead me into a good relationship. If I allow that core belief to make decisions for me, and it is a core belief, so it will make decisions for me, whether it's consciously or subconsciously. If I allow that core belief to continue, even if I meet a man who does not have or exhibit any of the qualities of what I so-called believe about men, I'm still going to think that. Right?
I see what you're saying. You're saying that core belief can, like,
yes,
slowly move into your own personal relationship with somebody.
No. That
right?
Core belief literally dictates your relationship with somebody. And that's why you need to know what it is so that you can even question it, right? So that you can even know.
How you sometimes get into those relationships where someone can be a little bit overly clingy.
Yes.
And or distant.
Mm-hmm. Especially if you had a parent that abandoned you.
Yeah.
People who have had a parent who abandoned them end up in relationships with people that they feel like they have to like win them or make them stay or make them want to be with them, right? And then if they don't want to be with them because they feel like smothered, they assume that it's something that's wrong with them. Why? Because their core belief from being abandoned is that they are not worth anyone wanting to be with them. And eventually, they will always be abandoned. These are examples of core beliefs. They're very simple, but they're literally running your life. And if you don't know what they are, then all of your decisions are basically revolving around these subconscious core beliefs and how you see people, how you relate to people, whether or not you get into a relationship with one girl over another, right? So, step one, what I'm asking you to do is take time to think about what are some of my core beliefs? What are some things that I believe, about myself or about women or about what it takes to get ahead, right? Or about success. Does that make sense? You have beliefs from childhood that literally were born from your own personal experience. They are not necessarily true, but you will not know that if you never even examine them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so in part 2, we start to look at those. We start to look at what are my core beliefs, because revolving around your core beliefs are your boundaries. If you believe something, then you may not have a boundary in that area. If you believe something else, you may have too rigid of a boundary. You see? You don't want to have extremely porous boundaries or extremely rigid boundaries. The idea, especially by the end of this book, is for all of us to have an idea of what our boundaries are, where they come from, why we have them, and as children, what we believed about ourselves that is causing us to not have those boundaries now. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm going to go on to read about behaviors. Behaviors have consequences. As Paul says, a man reaps what he sows. If we study, we will reap good grades. If we go to work, we will reap a paycheck. If we exercise, we will be in better health. If we act lovingly toward others, we will have closer relationships. On the negative side, if we sow idleness, irresponsibility, or out of control behavior, we can expect to reap poverty, failure, and or any effects of loose living. These are natural consequences of our behavior. The problem comes when someone interrupts the law of sowing and reaping in another person's life. A person's drinking or abuse should have consequences for the drinker or the abuser, not the victim. Stern discipline awaits him who leaves the path, it says. To rescue people from the natural consequences of their behavior is to render them powerless. I'm going to read that again, because this is important for you too, Mr. J, especially anyone who's looking into codependence or codependence recovery. To rescue people from the natural consequences of their behavior is to render them powerless. Why do you guys think that is? Why would us rescuing someone from their bad behavior or excusing their bad behavior, why and how does that make them powerless?
If you don't hold people accountable for their actions, they have no reason to change. If they can do something negative and not perceive the negative consequences of that, then they have no incentive to grow.
Exactly. That's a great answer. This happens a lot with parents and children. Parents often yell and nag instead of allowing their children to reap the natural consequences of their behavior. Parenting with love and with limits, with warmth and with consequences, produces confident children who have a sense of control over their lives. Choices. We need to take responsibility for our choices. This leads to the fruit of self-control. A common boundary problem is disowning our choices and trying to lay the responsibility for them on someone else. Think for a moment how often we use the phrase, I had to, or she or he made me, when explaining why we did or did not do something. These phrases actually betray our basic illusion that we are not active agents in many of our own dealings. We think someone else is in control, thus relieving us of our basic responsibility. We need to realize instead that we are in control of our choices, no matter how we feel. This keeps us from making choices to give reluctantly or under compulsion. Paul would not even accept a gift that he felt was given because the giver felt like he had to give it. He once sent a gift back so that any favor you do will be spontaneous and not forced. Joshua said the same thing to the people in his famous quote-unquote choice verse. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day who you will serve. Jesus said a similar thing to a worker who was angry about the wage that he had agreed to work for. Friend, I'm not being unfair to you. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? The man had made a free choice to work for a certain amount and was angry because someone who worked fewer hours than him got the same wage. Another example is the prodigal son's brother, who had chosen to stay home and serve and then was resentful. Not satisfied with his own choice, he needed to be reminded that he is the one who made the choice to stay home. Throughout the scriptures, people are reminded of their choices and asked to take responsibility for them. Like Paul says, if we choose to live by the Spirit, we live. If we choose to follow our sinful nature, we die. Making decisions based on others' approval or on guilt breeds resentment. I'm going to read that again. Making decisions based on others' approval or on guilt breeds resentment. We have been so trained by others on what we quote unquote should do that we think we're being loving when we do things out of compulsion or obligation. That is not love.
No.
Setting boundaries inevitably involves taking responsibility for your choices. You are the one who makes them. You, therefore, are the one who can live with the consequences. And you are the one who may be keeping yourself from making the choices you could be happy with. I'm going to take a moment there. I want you guys to review what I said. I'm going to grab some water so that I don't have scratchy, and I will be right back. Or speak amongst yourselves if you want to about what we just read.
Oh.
I'm sorry. I'm not paying terribly close attention. I'm trying to. I just today's been very long. I'm trying to engage more than I am.
Well, that's okay. You don't have to engage. You could just listen if you want. But engaging is, something that can help you. Because I mean, that's what I'm trying to do too. The thing is I have issues with, like, I don't have boundaries for myself, which is something that I need to set for myself. I need to set boundaries. Which is why, this is important, for me to at least give, talk about it. I need people to talk about it with, and this is the perfect time for me to do so. And even understanding these things, because like I was talking with Venus earlier, like, my belief was that, over 75% of people were cheating. And, the things that I've learned from her taught me that, no, that was just something I was taught or experienced as a kid. And that was my belief at the time. When I could do my own research, I can, and learn the things that I can put into action. I figured out, like, no, it's not 75 or over 75.
Yeah, actually, if you look it up, like just the whole number, like actually, hold up. Yeah,
I think it varies between the generation.
Well, this is a really a pretty current stuff. I'm just gonna send this to you in your DMs. But yeah, I have the same exact issue in terms of having. This is based on a study between 2010 to 2016. This is, but yeah, I have the same issue with not being able to, like, not having any boundaries myself. Like I over, like, I don't know. I'll let people pretty much, like, I don't know, like I'll give too much of myself, or I'll let people, like, walk, sort of just walk over me essentially. I'll let,
I
yeah,
see what you're saying. I have moments like that. So for me, I have boundaries, but I don't know that they're boundaries. You know. So
yeah.
that's something that I figured out. Like, I do have boundaries. I just don't know that they're boundaries. But I also, at times, let people walk all over me, like you said. You know.
Yeah.
And it's what it takes with this. What I'm loving about this whole conversation and hearing the stories from this book is, you know, what this is doing is helping us realize what our boundaries are and what boundaries we should, you know, implement into our lives. And then not only that, but also figuring out what to avoid, so that we don't, make the same mistakes that some of these people are making in their books. Like, there are
Yes.
boundaries that we're learning here that I didn't even know that we could set for ourselves.
Same. When I read this book, I read that skin was a boundary, I was like, holy shit, like as a girl, it was extremely freeing for me to recognize I don't have to let these dudes touch me. My skin is a boundary, and I haven't been respecting that boundary.
100%
I
I
didn't even
agree.
know that was an option. You know?
100% I agree, because I grew up, as you know, I grew up around a lot of sex.
Yes.
I used to go to sex parties. I used to, when I was young, and the only reason why I went to these things is because I thought it was okay. And something happened to me when I was younger that I don't really like to talk about, but I think what it whatever happened to me when I was younger made me go into this crazy scene, and I had no boundaries, so anything went when I was younger.
Yeah.
And now, it's 100% different.
Yeah.
If someone's touching me a certain way, grabs me a certain way, you'd be like, no, like, stop fucking touching me.
Yeah. Or I didn't give you permission
It's not okay.
to
Yeah.
touch me. Like, what makes you assume
I'll-
that you know me better than you know me? You're a stranger.
She says it so nicely. I'd say it in a lot more harsher way.
No, I wouldn't
But-
say it like that either. I'm just explaining it to you. Like,
okay.
that's what is actually happening, right?
Yeah, exactly. 100%.
But
By
here's
way,
the fun
thank you for
thing,
the-
Psycho
this,
Kensho.
this whole, like, I want to thank you for this time that you give us, Venus, because this is super important. I think this is
gonna
like the
change you
type of
guys'
class-
lives.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%, and it has already. Learning what this book has been. There's another book that I read too, and it's about abuse. I had to read that book first
What book?
before. Hold on, I have it somewhere. Let me get.
I
that
have
book.
read almost every abuse book. I bet you I've read that book. But I studied this subject. I know a lot about this subject. And I also know that in the early weeks, in the early days, you guys' boundaries are going to sound pretty weak.
Okay.
But as
so
you
this is
become
the book.
stronger, your
It's
no will
the
become stronger.
emotionally abusive relationship.
Yeah, I read that book.
Yeah. This is a really good book, because this book taught me about abuse that I received as a kid, and it also taught me about the abuses, the mental abuse, the physical abuse, and the verbal abuse that I was also given to my friends, my partners in my relationship, my own family, to myself. This book taught me all that.
Maybe we'll
Super
study
important
that book too. If everybody's into that after boundaries, maybe we could study that.
Okay, I could. I
I think there's so many instances where people probably have been abused in one form or another and don't even realize it.
They don't. And they don't realize it because it has been sadly normalized by the media.
Yep.
Yeah, 100%. You see that in all types of movies, and you see, and in reading that book, I see it in every fucking movie now. I point it out and I call it out. I'm like, oh shit, that's exactly what I just read from the
But
book.
isn't that amazing that now you can do that?
Yeah.
Before reading that, and this is what I want literally for every single fucking person in this server. Before reading that, you didn't know that. And you wouldn't have been able to recognize it.
No, before reading the book, it was just normal to me. It was what life is.
And you might go around with your core belief thinking, oh, well, everybody gets the shit beat out of them, when so-and-so gets mad at them. Or everybody has somebody, who cheats on them. These core beliefs allows you to accept behaviors that you should not be accepting and that are not normal. Media may normalize them, but knowing the difference between what is from your experience as a child and what is actually, the other half of humanity is experiencing, which is tons of kids grow up and they're not beat up. You know, tons of kids grow up and they're totally supported by their parents, and their parents don't cheat on them and they don't get yelled at, right? But if you come from a background of something else, then you're going to assume that's, you know, that must be everybody, but it's actually not. And so with your child mind, you don't know that. All you know is that you're worthless. For some reason, you're damaged, right? For some reason, you deserve XYZ, what's happening to you at home, right? And you believe these false core beliefs. But it isn't until you get to the point where you recognize, like a little compass that I'm giving you guys, oh, this isn't everybody's experience. This is actually my boundary. And this boundary was violated by people who did not have boundaries. This boundary was violated by my parents who went through similar situations that they put me through as a child. It is a cyclical, generational toxicity that permeates in families of abuse. Children who come from abusive environments, they are bound to perpetrate the same abuse, even though they may not want to, and they'll say, oh, that's not going to be me. But it has to be you because you don't know anything else. You haven't actually experienced a childhood without abuse. So you're not really going to be able to give that thing that you are so desiring of to your child until you work through the trauma that you have experienced in your childhood and unlearn those things. That's why, you know, again, I go back to core beliefs. That's why we're examining our core beliefs here in chapter 2, because from those core beliefs, we're going to give that to our future kids. And if we don't want to do that, then we have to examine those beliefs. We need to question, why the hell do I believe this? Where did this come from? And is this true for me now?
By the way, I want to say this, Venus. Forgive me. There will be moments where I'm not paying attention. I am cleaning a few things.
Okay.
So, just giving you guys a heads up. All right.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to go on to values. What we value is what we love and assign importance to. Often we do not take responsibility for what we value. We are caught up instead in valuing the approval of men rather than the approval of God, as the Bible says. Because of this misplaced value, we then miss out on life. We think that power, riches, pleasures will satisfy our deepest longing, which is really for love. When we take responsibility for out-of-control behavior caused by loving the wrong things or valuing things that have no lasting value, when we confess that we have a heart that values things that will not satisfy us, we can then receive help from God and His people to create a new heart within us. Boundaries help us not to deny ourselves, but to own our old hurtful values so that they can be changed. Again, I'm going to say this here. For those of you who do not believe in God, that's fine. I didn't believe in God either when I read this. Nonetheless, it is still intensely helpful, and the information that is in here applies whether you believe in God or you're an atheist. Limits. Two aspects of limits stand out when it comes to creating better boundaries. The first is setting limits on others. This is the component that we most often hear about when we talk about boundaries. In reality, setting limits on others is a misnomer. We can't actually do that. What we do is to set limits on our own exposure to people who are behaving poorly. We can't change them or make them behave right. Our model here could be God. He does not really set limits on people to make them behave. He sets standards, but lets people be who they are, and then separates himself from them when they misbehave, saying in effect, you can be that way if you choose, but you cannot come into my house. Heaven is a place for the repentant, and all are welcome. But God limits his exposure to evil, to unrepentant people, as should we. Now, just as an aside, does this mean that we should limit our exposure to anybody who doesn't claim to be a Christian? No. This means unrepentant people is the person who you set a boundary with once you know how, and that person does not give a fuck, basically. In a nutshell, an unrepentant person, aka evil, would be someone who is in your life who engages in abuse. As we get further through this book, you will learn how to speak to those people with confidence and give them the choice or consequence to stop that behavior. So here, unrepentant people is literally the people who instead choose to continue to engage in hurting you. Does that make sense? Scripture is full of admonitions to separate ourselves from people who will choose to act in destructive ways. We are not being unloving. Separating ourselves protects love because we are taking a stand against things that destroy love. The other aspect of limits is that it's helpful when talking about boundaries is setting our own internal limits. And Psycho Kensho touched on this. He's finding out that he has internal limits. We need to have spaces inside ourselves where we can have a feeling, an impulse, or a desire without acting it out. We need self-control without repression. We need to be able to say no to ourselves at times. This includes both our destructive desires and some good ones that are not wise to pursue at a given time. Internal structure is a very important component of boundaries and identity, as well as ownership, responsibility, and self-control. Contrast, then, these two responses. Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will instead put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. You wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I do not sow, gather where I have not scattered seed. Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. Take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. No other passage better illustrates a God-ordained responsibility of ownership and a use of talents. Although the example is of money here, this applies to internal talents and gifts as well. Our talents are clearly within our boundaries, and they are our responsibility. Yet, taking ownership of them is frightening at times, and sometimes risky. The parable of the talents says we are accountable, not to mention much happier when we are exercising our gifts and being productive. It takes work, practice, learning, prayer, resources, and grace for our and with forgiveness to overcome the fear of failure that the quote-unquote wicked and lazy servant gave into. He was not chastised for being afraid. We are all afraid when trying something new and difficult. He was chastised for not confronting his fear and trying the best he could. Not confronting our fear denies the grace of God and insults both his giving of a gift and his grace to sustain the gift as we are learning. Thoughts. Our minds and thoughts are important reflections of the image of God. No other creature on earth has our thinking ability. We are the only creatures who are called to love God with all our mind. And Paul writes that he was taking, quote unquote, captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. Establishing boundaries in thinking involves three things. 1. Owning our own thoughts. Many people have not taken ownership of their own thinking process. They are mechanically thinking the thoughts of others without ever examining them. They swallow the opinions of others, the reasonings of others, never questioning and thinking about their thinking. Certainly, we should listen to the thoughts of others and weigh them, but we should never give our minds over to anyone. We are to weigh things for ourselves in the context of relationship, quote unquote, sharpening each other as iron, but remaining separate thinkers. 2. We must grow in knowledge and expand our minds. One area in which we need to grow is in the knowledge of God and His Word. David said of knowing God's Word, "My soul is consumed with longing for your laws at all times. Your statutes are my delight and counselors." Why? We also learn much about God by studying His creation and His work. In learning about this world, we obey the commandment to rule and subdue, and all that is within it. So then, we learn about the world He has given us to become wise stewards. Whether we are doing brain surgery, balancing a checkbook, raising children, or another job, we are to use our brains to have better lives and glorify God. 3. We must clarify distorted thinking. We all have a tendency to not see things clearly, to think and perceive in disoriented ways or distorted ways. Probably the easiest distortion to notice is on our personal relationships. We rarely see people as they really are. Our perceptions are distorted by past relationships and our own preconception of who we think they are, even the people we know best. I want you guys to hear that one more time, because we literally just talked about this. We rarely see people as they really are. Our perceptions are distorted by past relationships and our own preconception of who we think they are, even the people that we know best. We do not see clearly because of the quote-unquote logs in our eyes. Taking ownership of our thinking and relationships requires being active in checking out where we may be wrong. As we assimilate new information, our thinking adapts and grows closer to reality. Also, we need to make sure that we're communicating our thoughts to others. Many people think that others should just be able to read their minds and know what they want or what they're thinking or why they did a certain thing. This only leads to frustration. Even Paul says, "For who among men knows the thoughts of a man except the man's spirit within him?" What a great statement about boundaries. We have our own thoughts. And so if we want others to know them, we must share them. Desires. Our desires lie within our boundaries. Each of us has different desires and wants, dreams and wishes, goals, plans, hungers and thirsts. We all want to satisfy ME. But why are there then so few satisfied MEs around? Part of the problem lies in the lack of structured boundaries within our personality. We can't define who the real me is and what we truly desire. Many desires masquerade as the real thing. They are lusts that come out of not owning our real desires. For example, sex addicts are looking for sexual experiences, but what they really desire is love and affection. James writes about this problem of not owning and seeking our real desires with pure motive. You want something, but you don't get it. You kill, you covet, but you cannot have what you want. You quarrel and you fight, yet you do not have, because you do not ask God. When you ask, you do not receive, because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. We often do not actively seek our desires from God, and those desires get mixed up with things that we do not really need. God is truly interested in our desires. He made them. Consider the following. You have granted him the desire of his heart, and have not withheld the request of his lips. You welcome him with rich blessings and place a crown of gold on his head. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you all the desires of your heart. He fulfills the desires of those who fear him. We'll talk about that fear another time, but it's not the kind of fear you guys are thinking about. God loves to give gifts to his children, but he is a wise parent. He wants to make sure his gifts are right for us. To know what to ask for, we have to be in touch with who we really are and what our real motives are. If we are wanting something to feed our pride or to enhance our ego, I doubt that God is interested in giving that to us. But if it would be good for us, he's very interested. We are also commanded to play an active role in seeking our desires. We need to own our desires and pursue them to find fulfillment in life. A desire accomplished is sweet to the soul, the Bible says, but it is also work. Love. Our ability to give and respond to love is our greatest gift. The heart that God has fashioned in this image is the center of our being. Its abilities to open up to love and to allow love to flow outward are crucial to our lives. Many people have difficulty giving and receiving love because of hurt and because of fear. Having closed their heart to others, they feel empty and meaningless and depressed. The Bible talks about both functions of the heart, receiving grace and love inward and the flow of it outward. Listen to how the Bible tells us we should love. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, with all your mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. A question: how could we possibly love our neighbor if we don't know how to love ourselves? Everyone, before becoming our boss, our co-worker, our friend, our mate, is our neighbor. That basically this person is talking about here in the Bible. So if we cannot love ourselves, why would we think that we're going to be able to give that love to our neighbor in a sustained and consistent way? We can't. And oftentimes, especially as codependents, we don't. It becomes control. It becomes manipulation. It becomes resentment and obligation, right? After the rose-colored glasses have come off of the first few months, whatever relationship dynamic we have grown up with seeps its way into our current relationship, doesn't it? If we're aware enough to look, we'll see the similarities between our relational pattern with our parents and the relational pattern that we form with the person who is going to be our romantic mate. We often end up feeling the same way, which for us can be comfortable, but it's not healthy at all, because that is us simply repeating the cycle, repeating subconsciously a pattern. And how we should receive love. We have spoken freely to you, Corinthians, and opened wide our hearts to you. We are not withholding any affection from you, but you are withholding yours from us. As a fair exchange, I speak as if to speak to my children. Open wide your hearts to us also. Our loving heart, like our physical one, needs an inflow as well as an outflow of lifeblood. And like its physical counterpart, our heart is a muscle, a trust muscle. This trust muscle needs to be used and exercised. If it is injured, it will slow down or weaken. We need to take responsibility for this loving function of ourselves and use it. Love concealed or love rejected can both kill us. Many people do not take ownership for how they resist love. They have a lot of love around them, but do not realize that their loneliness is a result of their own lack of responsiveness to it. Often they will say, others' love cannot get in. This statement negates their responsibility to respond. We maneuver subtly to avoid responsibility in love. We need to claim our hearts as our property and work on our weaknesses in that area. It will open up life to us and love. We need to take responsibility for all of the above areas of our souls, and these all lie within our boundaries. But taking care of what lies within our boundaries isn't easy. Neither is allowing other people to take care of what lies within their boundaries. But as you will find in the next chapter, boundary problems come in very recognizable shapes. Guys, thank you so much for coming for chapter 2 today. This is so wonderful. Do you guys have any questions? Do you want me to make the form for the core beliefs for you to go by and work on your own until next week's meeting for chapter 3? Also, is there anything that any of you guys want to talk about with each other, or anything that I touched on that you want to ask about?
Still not myself. Nothing on my end.
Okay. Were you able to get something out of this? And I know, Sky, you were muted and came in and out, but hopefully you were able to get something out of this as well.
There's definitely stuff. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
There's definitely stuff that I was stuff that I was getting out of it. And a lot of, I don't know, that there's just a lot of stuff that I guess I hadn't really thought about, and a lot of food, I guess, things to consider. I'm still sort of dipping my toes into the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
So it's a lot to take in, but
It is. It is a lot to take in. And that's why I kind of have broken it down in a weekly, because there is a lot to take in. And some of it is the kind of stuff that we might want to take in more than once, right?
Yeah.
To make sure that we fully understand what's being said, how it's being said, how does it apply to us?
I was thinking like, I don't think I ever really had any instances of my parents were, very, very good people for, when they were around. They were just always, working and stuff like that. So they were never really around. I guess I was kind of a latchkey kid in that respect, but they had to do what they had to do to make ends meet.
Yes.
I was thinking, I was like, well, then there are, but then I was like, you know what? I guess there are, that child of, abuse comes more than just comes from other places than just parents.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and I was
It
like,
does. It could be school. It could be schoolmates. It could have been teachers. It could have been,
like like uncles or
uncles.
aunts.
Uncles and aunts, sadly, have been, the perpetrator for a subset of children who have experienced some of their worst abuse. There hasn't been necessarily from their parents, but if their parents were working, let's say, and they would have the uncle or aunt take care of the child could experience abuse from whoever was the caretaker, babysitter, But all of these types of relationships sets us up for these future relationships now where we don't always have boundaries or know what boundaries are and how to express them to others because ours were violated by someone, whoever that person was.
Yep. Yeah. And I know for a while I lived essentially my life like essentially like I was living within a castle or citadel with stone walls all around.
Yeah.
After a while, I guess, after, I was, well, a lot of stuff happened. After going into the army, I got hit by a truck and then my back got messed up and doctors put me on pain medication. But this is back before that, the opioid crisis, went into full effect. So when that happened, I was still on it. And they panicked and they were like, "All right, you're not on this anymore." And they just took me off of it without tapering me down. They were just like, "Here's something else."
Yeah.
And I was up to 3 OxyContin 80 milligrams.
Which is very unfair to do to you at that time.
Yeah, so I went from 240 milligrams of oxycodone a day to nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially that in turn led me to becoming looking for it on the street and
an addict.
Essentially becoming a junkie. So,
and that's fine. I think you're definitely not the only person here who has had a history of addiction.
Nope, I definitely have had addiction.
Yeah. See?
But I guess it was in that time, when I was going through that and getting sober, and I was just like, you know what, all these walls and all this stuff, I was like, because just trying to keep everybody, I was like, I guess, well, screw it, I'm just gonna just tear it all down and just be as open and forward. But then I was left with no boundaries, and I found that doesn't work either.
That hurts you, in fact.
Yeah. There's a middle ground that you have to find that works where you have your boundaries set and you can still be open with everyone, but you're respecting yourself and what you need as well and not being taken advantage of.
And that's what I hope to get you guys. That's the point that I hope to get you guys to in by doing this.
Yeah.
I really want that for you.
Because 100% all of us talking to each other helps.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, bless you, V, for hosting this and for coordinating, for taking your time and spending it with us. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That means a lot to me.
I hope today we can all get together and do something fun, maybe VR chat, I don't know, or something else.
Did you all finish? Did you all finish the movie Eternals, or did you all?
No, I fell asleep.
Yeah. I woke up.
How long is that movie?
I'm gonna send it personally to you, Mr. J.
It's a bit of it's pretty long because I woke up after you. I woke up like an hour.
Thanks for reminding me. Hold on 1 second, guys. I just realized I should stop the recording for us.
Recording?
1 sec.
This is recorded?
Yeah, remember I was saying I'm gonna record it and then I will send it to Bruno because he had to leave.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay, 1 sec. No, nobody share anything yet. Let me just say goodbye to it. Okay, everyone, thank you for listening. I hope that you were able to get something out of this. If you have not yet, please tune in to next week's meeting. It will be on a Monday. Unfortunately, this week was different. We had it on a Tuesday because of me, but the future ones will in fact be on Monday, and we will be starting chapter 3. Thank you.